And it's over to you, Marion.
Thank you very much, Callum. I'm Marion Pallister. I'm Pax Christi Scotland Chair, and I want to wish you all a very good evening on this International Women's Day. You're all most welcome, and a very special welcome to our speaker and participants in all corners of our common home. I think we have people on several continents, which is great. Sister Wamuyu comes to us from Kenya. And I'm afraid, however, that I have some bad news in that Helen Martin, who was to be our other speaker, was admitted to hospital this morning. So you may have to put up with me for a little while this evening, which you weren't expecting, but it will all be about Helen. So that's something to come. Established in 1977, the UN's International Women's Day is one on which women are recognized for their achievements without regard to divisions, whether national, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economic, or political. But women still face discrimination, violence, and marginalisation, threatening their peace of mind and peace itself. Our event this evening asks the question, what price peace? And we have with us this evening our new chaplain. We were very sad to wave goodbye to Father John Convery because he's been sent away to other pastures, but we welcome very, very warmly Father Jim Clark, who's in Lanarkshire in central Scotland, and of course he too is a member of the Severian community. We're going to miss Father John, but we're hoping to hear from Father Jim this evening, who's going to start with a short reflection and prayer to begin our event this evening.
Thank you very much, Marion, and it's very nice to be here. Yeah, Father John wasn't sent to Coventry, he was sent to Preston, so that's where I was in between Castlemilk. So I'm now in Coatbridge in Lanarkshire, and John is down in Preston, so we've kind of swapped. So it's nice to be part of the Pax Christi movement and to be part of this team. When I was reflecting on International Women's Day and the piece, a piece of scripture that jumped out to me was a Magnificat. The thing that always hits me about peace is, you know, if you that phrase, if you want peace, work for justice. And Mary of the Magnificat is the great advocate of justice, and so I thought I'd pray the Magnificat with your okay, and I came across a modern interpretation of the Magnificat, which might perhaps stir up something a little bit different for us. So we'll just take a moment and visualize Mary, the voice of justice, coming to foretell of a different world. And we know, by God, we need that vision of the world that Mary had. My soul is alive with thoughts of God. What wonder their liberating works. Though the world has been harsh to me, God has shown me kindness, seen my worth, and called me to courage. Surely those who come after me will call me blessed, even when my heart weighs heavy with grief. Still, so does hope abide with me. Holy is the one who makes it so. From generation to generation, love's mercy is freely handed out. None are beyond the borders of God's transforming compassion. The power of God is revealed among those who labour for justice. They humble the arrogant. They turn unjust thrones into dust. Their wisdom is revealed in the lives and truths of those on the margins. God is a feast for the hungry. God is the great redistributor of wealth and resources. God is the ceasing of excessive and destructive production, that all the earth might rest. Through exiles and enslavement, famines and wars, hurricanes and gun violence, God is a compassion in loss, a deliverer from evil, a lover whose touch restores. This is the promise they made to my ancestors, to me, to all the creatures and creations now and yet coming. And in this promise, I find my strength. Come, great healer, and be with us. Amen.
Thank you so much, Father Jim. That gives us such a good start to where we're going this evening. It's our event this evening actually has wide implications, which kind of follow on from what you're saying there, Father Jim. What price do women pay in their pursuit of peace of mind and indeed of peace itself? We would at this point have been hearing from Helen Martin, and I'm so sorry that she's not with us, because I've known Helen for decades. Perhaps not flattering to either of us to say that, but my first connection with her was when I was a journalist in Glasgow, and Helen was campaigning for better housing from a reluctant local authority. That strong community activism led in time to her present post as programme coordinator for Activate, which is Glasgow University's community-based introduction to community development practice for local community activists, volunteers, and practitioners. Helen has said, I have a real passion for working with local communities in addressing inequality and injustice. And I'm sure that that passion extends to seeking peace of mind and peace for women. And I've met some of her students, and I know that she is already imbuing them with that passion. I don't know how Helen was going to address our question tonight, what price peace? What I do know is that Helen and many other women like her have already paid the price for achieving some kind of peace in their communities, paid with their health. Helen's admittance to hospital today is evidence to that. And last year, her fellow activist with whom she worked very closely many years ago, Cathy McCormack, died after years of ill health that originated in the damp houses that she and Helen fought to improve. I ghost wrote a book called The Wee Yellow Butterfly, an autobiography of Cathy McCormack. And don't worry, it's out of print and only to be found in a very few bookshops these days. So I'm not giving it a plug. But in that book, we mentioned Helen Martin extensively, because while Cathy was the one with the clever words to the camera and for newspaper quotes, Helen was an organizer who galvanized the community in a different, equally effective way. The two women lived in Easter House, one of Glasgow's sprawling housing schemes for those of you who live elsewhere outside of Scotland and are unaware of the way that our housing is organised. For people who had lived in Glasgow's slums, these schemes initially seemed heaven sent, until the women discovered how damp they were. However fastidious they were at cleaning their houses, black mold covered their walls, slithering into their kitchens and bathrooms, appearing in corners of their living rooms. Their children developed asthma and other breathing difficulties. Cathy McCormick eventually would succumb to the severe lung problems developed in those days. Glasgow District Council, the Scottish Office, Greater Glasgow Health Board, and the Central Government Health Brigade, remember this is all before devolution, before Scotland had its own parliament, they launched a health campaign urging people to go jogging, eat brown bread, and stop smoking. Now, to Helen and Cathy, that was just ludicrous, because they knew what the real choices were then, and as sadly now, were between hypothermia and malnutrition, or as we've been saying this winter, choosing between heating and eating. They got together with professionals to make health campaigns relevant to their community, and they grabbed the ear of the media on their dampness campaign. Helen's husband said that the women attended more meetings than the MPs in the House of Commons, and he was probably right. One member of the group, Anne Maguire, died at the age of 42, perhaps worn out by the stress of trying to get people to listen and bring about change. A high price to pay for trying to gain peace of mind for women frantic about the health of their children. When those women complained about their damp houses, they were told they were boiling the kettle too much. They were even told, and I swear that this is the truth, they were told they were breathing too much. No one mentioned that the poorly insulated houses were eating up cash to heat them, were themselves to blame. Money was literally going up in smoke and fumes from their heating, trying to make a difference. Helen was at this time the chair of East Hall Residents Association. Now, East Hall was a small part of Easter House, and Cathy was already talking about a war without bullets, a political stitch-up that kept working class people under. The life expectancy gap between working and middle classes had risen in the 1980s from 10 years to 28 years, an unbelievable price to pay for peace of mind. In 1990, Glasgow was nominated as the European City of Culture. The women of East Hall, this damp-ridden part of Easter House, decided to make their mark, bring about change. They started a theatre group, and their play, Damp Busters, initially was performed at 8 venues during that festival, including some very posh venues where audiences had perhaps never heard of a damp house, received the plays. It really was good. I saw it a couple of times, and there were good reviews. It made people laugh, and that made people listen. And so it put the issue of damp houses and the link with poor health on the map. 29% of Glasgow's housing stock at that time was affected by dampness, condensation, or mold growth, and now people knew about it. So the authorities ran a competition to produce better houses. An Ulster group of architects won it, and that was that. You think that means that they built the houses that company of architects had designed. You're very wrong. The project just sank without trace. The project wasn't to be taken forward. Helen Martin and Cathy McCormack thought differently and took the plans all the way to Strasbourg. There was a time limit on their efforts, but they made it, and funding was made available. They still had to fight for match funding from Glasgow and elsewhere in Britain. The saga was long, but the upshot was that the project was built. It was a little block of flats, which I visited as a journalist to see the end result of the East Hall battle for recognition, for confirmation that their claims that dampness was not their fault, but the fault of poorly constructed houses, for their own peace of mind that children would grow up without debilitating illnesses caused by their homes. And I can tell you that top flat that I visited was a tropical paradise. The lady who was the fortunate tenant was sitting in a sleeveless top in the middle of winter. And because of the insulation, double glazing and so on, her electricity bill was a fraction of what she'd paid in the kind of houses that they'd all been campaigning about. 1-0 to East Hall Residents Association in that first round with the authorities. Helen and Cathy went through intensive training for popular education in Ireland and began popular education groups in Easterhouse. Called Popular Democracy Education Resource Centre, they spread the idea throughout Scotland. This was all just about campaigning and human rights and getting the kind of lives that they felt entitled to. They appeared on television programs, including religious slots. They made videos and they set up Scottish Popular Education Forum. Helen and Cathy began to give talks in universities around Scotland, which no doubt led to Helen's current position at Glasgow University. Devoting themselves to improving life for their community no doubt took its toll not only on Cathy and Helen, but on so many other women who gave of their time and efforts. Health, partnerships, careers may well have been damaged or gone in very different directions from how they'd been imagined. Was it a price worth paying? I can't really speak for Helen, but I know that her students and colleagues at Glasgow University are her great fans, so she must be getting something right. My prayers are with her tonight, not only for her health, but also that her work inspiring another generation to make changes for the better in their communities goes from strength to strength. Because as we know in the news recently here in the UK, people are still dying from ill health contracted in damp houses. There are still women whose lives are blighted by poor living and work conditions, by violence, by unequal pay, lack of respect. It's not all that easy being a woman in 2023, wherever we live in the world. We need people like Helen Martin to motivate us to work for change. So I thank you for listening. I'm sorry that Helen isn't the one who was speaking to you tonight, but let's keep her all keep her in our prayers this evening, and we'll see if we can make sure that that next generation moves on. And now let's head to Kenya, where Sister Wamuyu is waiting to discuss the price that women pay for peace in the wider world. Sister Wamuyu is co-president of Pax Christi International, our parent organization. She is a senior lecturer in peace and conflict studies at St. Paul's University in Nairobi. As an ardent peace scholar and peace builder, she trains both religious sisters and youth in active non-violence and peacemaking, and advocates for termination of female genital mutilation, a harmful rite of passage for girls and women. In homes and communities around the world, from Scotland to Afghanistan, Kenya to Iran, women's freedoms and peace of mind suffer in many ways. Let's hear Wamuyu's thoughts on the cost of seeking peace. Sister Wamuyu, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Marian. So I'm going to share my screen. I have so many things on. Just give me a minute. Sometimes since I'd opened it, I think I need to save it again so that I'm able to. I need to save the PowerPoint again so that I can display it. Just give me a second. Because I displayed earlier, I think that's why it's let's try it again now. Hope you can see it now. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, we can see it, Wamuyu. Thank you.
I want to see if I do it in the slideshow, whether it's better.
Yep, that works well.
Okay. Thank you. So the approach I'm taking is looking at peace in a wider perspective, not only the issues about dealing with direct violence, but also looking at the cultural and structural violence. So I will be going first from that perspective. So we will follow the slides. So first of all, I want us to journey together for peace as a group gathered here tonight. Thank you for choosing peace, for modeling a just, peaceful, and nonviolent life to your families, communities, countries, and the global world. Let us celebrate all the women in our families, communities, and the global world for being bridge builders in our broken world. Blessed indeed are the peacemakers. I would like us at this time to remember all the women in our families, communities, countries, and the global world that have laid down their lives advocating and working for peace. Like a grain of wheat, they had to die for people to rise to carry on their work for peace. I would like us to take a moment and remember those people from our own countries and also those we know from far away. May these seeds that died for us to have a peaceful world rest in peace, and also rejoice in the fact that their death was not in vain. Now I want to highlight about what this day means for us from my own perspective. Let us retrace our steps on a journey that only we as women have walked. A journey we have walked and lived as nurturers, healers, wounded healers, accompaniers, co-creators, investors and reinvestors, dreamers and visionaries. We have created a world where today's generation find a safe space to cry, to dream, and hope for a better tomorrow. Our backs are broken, our eyes full of tears, our ears ever open from listening to the moans and suffering of children, old and young, women and men. Our feet tired and sore from the journeys we have made for peace. Our voices sore from advocating for a better and peaceful world. What achievements have we made? That's what we are gathering here tonight, to reflect on this journey this year. Today we gather again to rekindle and reignite the world anew, to recommit ourselves to working towards peace, no matter the price we have to pay, that today's and future generations will inherit a more just, peaceful, and non-violent world. We want to witness that the only way to peace is through dialogue, respect, mercy, justice, harmony, and compassion, and not through weapons of mass destruction and small arms and light weapons or any other militaristic way. So I want to, before I can talk about price we have to pay for peace, we need to understand the context in which we build this peace. First of all, I want to look at what I understand by peace. A scholar known as Johann Gotang speaks about peace in two ways: negative peace and positive peace. In the negative peace, he's thinking about direct violence, that is lack of it, but presence of structural violence and cultural violence. And in the positive peace, he's thinking about lack of all those three, that there is no direct violence, there is no structural violence, and there is no cultural violence. Of course, we know this could be taken as utopia. However, that's what we are being invited as peacemakers and peace builders and peace practitioners to do. We are being invited to work towards a society that respects other people, a society that shares, a society that sees everybody as equal, a society that does not stress otherness in a negative way, but accepts all, even enemies. And for us Christians, it's the call that Jesus is inviting us to love all, even our enemies. So this is the context in which women find themselves across the world, where there is direct violence, abuses of all forms, discrimination, displacement, rape as a weapon of war. And also looking at the current situation, real violence that is distracting, is a distraction to infrastructure and above all to the lives of the people. We see that situation in Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, South Sudan, and many other parts. In fact, in all our countries, we are aware of some place where there is direct violence, even if it's not maybe in the country, in the homes or in communities. Now, structural violence, on the other hand, shows itself in many different ways. However, I'm stressing on exclusion from different tables of decision-making and negotiation, the structures and legal frameworks that exclude other people, and mainly of the other gender. Policies that pay little or no attention to women issues and voices, and also others, the minorities. Then in cultural violence, we have, this is situations where there is support of abuse and discrimination and exclusion of women, for instance, cultures that practice FGM, that is female genital mutilation, as a way of life or as a way of controlling women's sexuality. Early marriages, sometimes so that people can have money, and mainly it's about that. And usually this happens a lot in Africa, where girls are married to old men because they have wealth. Then honor killings, we see a lot of that in India and Pakistan. Then sex preferences, where through ultrasound, children that are of the female gender, their lives are terminated. And this happens a lot in Taiwan, some places in South Korea, and many other places in the world. Then the denial of equal opportunities in education, a lot of it in sub-Saharan Africa. For example, in my own country, some communities prefer to have a lot of cows as opposed to girls. So they would rather not educate the girl, but use the money to buy cows as a, for wealth purposes. So these are just some of the statistics. In fact, these statistics were even captured today in our daily nation, being Women's Day. But we can get this data in the documents, for example, the UN documents, UNICEF, and many other documents that are looking at women issues and men issues as well. However, more geared to women. For instance, over 200 million in sub-Saharan Africa have undergone female genital mutilation. And if I can speak to this particular practice, it harms women. Sometimes it usually affects them emotionally. Some women suffer fistula, which prevents them from joining other women. And other women also during childbirth. And this practice is in some communities in Africa, but also in Europe, where we have immigrants who already are practicing it in their home countries. Then the 40 billion number of hours is what women spend a year collecting water. And remember, water is a human right. Then 1 in 37 women in Africa die during pregnancy and childbirth, as compared to 1 in 7,800 in Australia. That is worrying. Then 130 million child brides live in Africa, and in Nigeria alone, we have 22 million of them. You know, girls whose bodies are not even formed for motherhood. Then 40% of Africa's female MPs have been sexually harassed at work. And then that last one is more hopeful in the sense that hopeful, but also very worrying that only one African country has 50% of women, you know, in positions of power. And you can see in Nicaragua, Cuba, and Mexico, and United Emirates, where we have over 50% of women in positions. So these are just statistics, but there are many more to show us the reality in which women have to fight for peace. And that's why I put these statistics, because we are not only looking at the wars that we see physically, but in terms of structures. This is what women have to fight for. And this in order for them to experience peace. Peace, as I have explained earlier. Now I wanted to look at some of the approaches that women are using for peace building. And why I'm sharing some of these, which are within Africa and beyond, but some of them are specifically African. Why I'm sharing is that these are practices that can help deal with violence in Africa. However, they are not brought to the table, or they are not utilized when we are talking about peace building. Therefore, women's ways or women's approaches are not brought to the table because sometimes they are trivialized or looked at as not important. In fact, in my own culture, there is a saying that don't believe a woman. If she says something, don't believe her until the following day, if it happens. So already, there's that exclusion or discrimination. So in the indigenous nonviolent approaches, I want to look at this particular belt here. Now, you can see the woman is tying it around her womb. Okay, this is not the original belt, but it's modernized. However, it will explain what I'm trying to communicate, that when a woman gives birth, she wears that belt to bring back the womb. It's also a belt that she uses as a childbirth control device. It's also used to as prevention against violence from the male gender. So if she's wearing it like that, the male cannot not approach her. So in that way, it's a symbol of peace. Then traditionally, it was used to bless husbands and sons before they went to war. However, these days, the women are using it to dissuade men from going to war. So if she removes it, then the man will not go to war because he has no blessing. So women are using that to stop wars. So my question is, why are wars, like in this particular area where these women are using this belt, it's a place where we have intractable conflicts. So I'm asking myself, why are they not using this particular symbol to prevent those conflicts? And yet it is there at their disposal. Other nonviolent approaches that women are using is the word, mother's word of mouth, to warn against violence. So if a mother speaks and says, don't go to war, they will listen, especially the young people will listen, because motherhood in Africa and even in the world is respected. So if a mother speaks, then that word is taken as gospel truth, and they will not go to spilling of a mother's milk to dissuade from participation in war. When she spills the milk from her breast, she's reminding them that she suckled them, and therefore, if she has refused them to do something, then they should obey. And usually they do obey. Then sharing your meals as a sign of acceptance of a family and also ethnic communities. Now, in Africa, when you share a meal, you can't just share a meal unless you are welcome. And usually we say that a person who doesn't share a meal is a witch. So for you to share a meal, the person is communicating that they have accepted you. Then we have merry-go-round groups, and this is across the world, where women come together to share ideas, to help each other when there is a problem. So that the last one can be, it's across board. Then this particular nonviolent peace building is across board. It's not only in Africa, where women meet in forums to share as equals, where they come to search for new ways of creating peace among themselves. They share ideas. They share their stories of pain, of fear, of hope. They weave, as it were, the threads of their different experiences. And we have women all over the world. You have seen them from Africa, as Marian said, across board, where they are in the streets, speaking about peace, advocating for peace. They are in the homes financially helping people. We have women in Europe helping women in Africa to educate their children, to start businesses. We have women lawyers accompanying poor, abused women from across board. You have women from Europe helping women in Africa, to look for lawyers or standing in for them. Then in my country, we have a women's hospital that supports women that have been abused, and they also look for lawyers for them. So they have supportive system, even counseling. Now, the next thing is then, if women are doing all this, what have they to pay for peace? One is that women are the ones who pass values. They're custodians of culture. However, we find that they are rarely brought to the table. And if they are brought to the table, sometimes they are the agenda of discussion, as opposed to people who come to share their experiences on equal basis. The peace building efforts that they are engaged in, we rarely see them brought forward, especially at the high level of negotiation or decision making. And this is equally true at the grassroots level, that women are doing so much, but we are not seeing that coming. So women have to pay the price, and yet they continue working for peace. The non-violent approaches to peace building that women are engaged in do not attract much attention, because a lot of times it is the weapons of war that speak louder. So we see the weapons of mass destruction, small arms, light weapons. Those are the ones that are used mainly to deal with violence, as opposed to looking at the non-violent approaches, which women are using. Women tend to sit down and talk, share ideas, correct each other, show each other the way, as opposed to so much use of violence, violent tools or weapons. So what coming towards the end, looking at women's journey for building peace. So what is it? What is the call for us as women and the men who work with women to work towards peace? We still have to work towards all girls and women's emancipation, to advocate for the recognition of women as equal partners in the different tables of decision-making. We have to advocate and call on our governments and other institutions and bodies, for example, the UN, the church, and the churches as well, and religious bodies, for deliberate actions on women issues in terms of voice, in terms of policy, in terms of legal frameworks. So we need to do that so that women's voices can be heard and also brought to the table. Also, we need to invite leaders of institutions at all levels, that is locally and globally, to recognize women's unique contribution to peace building, especially through nonviolent approaches as opposed to militaristic ones. So let's find out, what are women doing which will change this world of violence? For instance, in Ukraine, the women are doing a lot, but is that coming to the table? Or what we are hearing is just more and more weapons being sent there, and true in all the other countries across the world where there is war. There is so much women are doing, and they are the ones who are suffering most from wars, because they are the ones who have to nurture the children, they have to care for the elderly, they have to receive the men when they are hurting. So they are the ones who understand what the real violence is, while often the men are at the forefront. So going forward, the women's creative, resilient, patient, and openness will stand with and for us, women, as we create and recreate a more just, peaceful, and non-violent world. Thank you, and peace to you all. I welcome comments, questions, clarifications. And so let us continue to weave a world that is just, peaceful, and non-violent. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you so much, Wamuyu. I love the idea of women as bridge builders. And I think that you've inspired us to reignite the world. I'm sure that you have done that this evening with your words. You gave us a lot of statistics there. 1 in 4 women in the UK suffers from gender violence. And the figures for gender violence rocketed during the pandemic. And we have a growing culture here in which women are disrespected. So we have a long way to go. And I think that it would be good now to pass over to Callum for our question and answer session. I'm not sure what's in the chat box yet, but your comments and your questions are very, very welcome at this point. Callum, can I pass over to you?
Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Wamuyu. What I'll do is I'll bring you back on screen and just give everyone a moment to kind of ponder and reflect on what you've shared with us tonight, and to share thoughts, questions, reflections in the chat to really begin our conversation. And I'm going to turn to Anne's comment first of all, who says, how should we respond to the struggle for justice and peace of the girls and women of Iran and Afghanistan? What do you think, Wamuyu?
Thank you. Is it Callum?
Yes.
Yes. First of all, I think we
I think you've muted yourself. Let's see. Hopefully you can see the option to unmute. Wamuyu, I don't know if you can hear me, but you should see the option to unmute. I think you've muted yourself.
I've muted myself, yes.
There we are. There we are. So your thoughts on how we respond to the struggle for justice and peace for women and girls in places such as Iran and Afghanistan?
Yes. First of all, the struggles of the girls in Iran and Afghanistan. If you look across board, though we are kind of seeing them, but across board is that in general, we need to address them from the cultural perspective. Most of the violence about girls and women across the globe is to do with the culture, a culture that believes that women are second-class citizens, that women have no rights. So the first thing is, in such situation, because of the chains that these women have been put in, it's for the outside world to speak. And this is where I usually call on all of us to speak, to advocate for those without a voice, because often the girls in Iran, in Afghanistan, they are tied with chains of culture, a culture that believes women are there to be seen and not heard, a culture that believes that women are kind of, it's like tools for men, for the male gender. And this is across board where cultures, such cultures, and of course, a lot of it also has to do with religion, a religion that allows such practices. And therefore, the first thing is what I was talking about, changing policies, legal systems that also support this violence, because it is violence, where the culture says a woman should not do this, a woman should not go unveiled, she should cover her head, a woman should do 1, 2, 3. And when we say that, then the religion, which actually should be the one to liberate people, also embraces that and kind of makes, it's like stamping already a violence. So I would say we are the people also who can speak. Of course, within the society itself, there are people, I believe there are people speaking, but we need to join them and speak loud and challenge the UN bodies and, the churches as well, to speak against this injustice, because we are a global family. We cannot just say what happens in Iran does not affect me as a person. So I believe when women or men or whoever, and in this case it's women and girls, are enchained, then we need to speak against that, because an injustice, we cannot sit down and let an injustice continue. So we are the voice of these people.
Now, I'm going to turn to Carmen's question. I'll come back to the point that Delia has raised in the chat, but just really to say it's wonderful to have Delia joining us. I read there from Trinidad and Tobago, so it really is incredible to have such an international audience with us this evening. It's wonderful on such an important day too. But Carmen's question points out that, or asks, how do you feel, Wamuyu, that we could jointly promote the space for women working for peace through churches, through organisations like Pax Christi, and how do we do that in such a way that it builds a long-lasting effect?
First of all, it's to understand the setting, to understand, because I'm a very strong believer in not how do I put it? I believe that we should let people speak for themselves. So in order for us to work with these people, then we need to understand the setting through their eyes.
Mhm.
So if the church needs to actually interact with the people, find out, because we could be responding to questions or to problems that people are not asking. So I believe it's the way to go. But first we need to understand what are the needs of the people. Let the people say what are their needs, so that we are not kind of responding to a need that is not there. Because there's that tendency of us feeling people have a problem, so let's go and help them. So the first thing is to interact. And I believe this type of a forum that we have here is very, very important to bring those voices. And these days, because we have this type of forum, when you're having such meetings, to invite these type of groups, let them speak for themselves so that we hear and they have a space to speak. And then the other thing is to, sometimes a lot of violence against women happens because of economic and social empowerment. So sometimes we may need to respond as a church to those needs as well, those basic needs that already somebody does not have, therefore they feel they are not dignified, they don't have dignity. So we need first to restore that. And that means then sharing the resources we have so that people kind of have a voice through the economic empowerment.
And then linking that to where the church is just now, Carmen goes further and asks whether Fratelli Tutti, whether Pope Francis's encyclical would be an effective place to start.
Yes, if you look at Fratelli Tutti, what the Pope is inviting actually is that, first of all, we have to be the Good Samaritan. And what is he saying about the Good Samaritan? Is going out of our way to see the other person as my brother, as my sister. And then he also challenges, where are we putting our money? He has challenged that where is our priority? We need to, if we are going to respond to be my sister's or brother's keeper, then I have to do something practical. And there are very many challenges, but one of them is actually challenging about wars, because wars destroy people, and therefore he's asking that money or resources is moved to what matters, and not to investing in weapons, in war, but putting that particular finances so that it helps other people, to give them dignity. So that's how I would see Fratelli Tutti responding.
That's really helpful. And I said I would return to Delia's point, and I'd like to do that now. She specifically talks about the way in which we can harness the amazing work being done by so many women and girls in terms of development efforts, in terms of work on environmental justice, and asks about how we can channel that to address challenges of climate change.
You want me to respond to that?
Please, yeah.
Yes, you know, if you look across board, women are very close to the environment, because especially in rural areas, the women have to, for example, in the context of Africa, the women have to collect firewood, they have to go look for water, they have to look for food. So when the environment is affected, it actually affects the woman to the core. So investing in the environment, taking care of the environment, equals actually taking care of that population. And what is happening is that, for instance, if I can give an example of that place where I was talking about, the Peace Belt or the Birth Belt, In that community, what the people are doing now, the women are actually carrying weapons, because when they go to collect water or go to collect firewood, since the security personnel are not there, so the women have to carry weapons to be able to go and collect that firewood or water, and therefore it's increasing the violence. The other thing, when we destroy the environment, it means that we are also reducing on the resources, which also create conflicts. So the environment becomes very, very important, and therefore we need to invest in that. And that brings us to that Laudato Si, that other encyclical. The importance of us taking care of the environment so that it can also take care of us. And for women, it's key, as I said, because they are the ones who suffer most.
If I turn to Marian's question, which is specifically about violence and violence from those in authority, she says, we have seen disrespect from police in England for women and girls, not only disrespect, but violence and even murder. Is there a similar problem in African states and perhaps even across the world? And how do we address violence that comes from perceived authority figures?
So let me see that is it on the chat, the question?
It is. It's the third last message there. It's particularly about violence directed towards women and girls from those in authority.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in fact, I'm surprised that there is that in England, because I thought it's not as in our setting. It's key here, and I was actually going to share, but I knew that the time was limited. But the police here is not this. In fact, the police here are a problem to the citizens because of the ethics that some of them have embraced, where when a woman reports, for instance, that she's maybe abused or something, then the police, sometimes the policemen will send her away or cause more harm. Like we have had cases, not every, I mean, they are not widespread, but we have had cases when a woman has reported being raped by her husband, because, you know, in our laws, there is no such a thing as being raped, as intimate rape. It's not there. It's not in our constitution. So if a woman goes and reports that she has been raped by her husband, the police will just say those are domestic issues. So, and girls, of course, have been abused in the police stations. Most women will not go and report in the police station, but however, in Kenya, they are beginning to have, because of the push from the lawyers, the women lawyers, from we have some women in parliament, and also women here are beginning to, from the constitution, to know their rights. They are beginning to demand that in every police station there is a female, so that women can at least go there to be protected. Yeah, so that problem is here, and it's widespread. It's not, I think, as I said, I was surprised that in England it's there now, or it has been, I don't know. When I was there, I used to think that maybe when I came back home and looked at the police in England and police here, I thought how lucky the English are. But now, as I see from Marian, it seems like it's the same.
Perhaps this would be a good time to bring Marian into the conversation.
I would just like to add to that, that in India, I was visiting projects in a small rural place, and women had gone to the police and reported domestic violence. The police had turned them away, and I think, although they didn't say so, that they had actually physically abused them, perhaps even abused them in a sexual way as well. So the women went home, they told everybody in the village, and about 150 women descended on the police station, banging pots and pans very, very loudly. The police took the report of that woman then, and it made a difference. And I think that that may be a very simplistic way of looking at it. It was certainly a very effective way, but I think that we just have to make some noise. We have to raise our voices. We're told to raise our voices for the poor and whatever. We raise our voices for women as well. Thank you.
And Marion, I suppose I'm just wondering if you would stay on with us just now, because I'm conscious of what you brought in from Helen's perspective as well, and perhaps you would stay in the conversation. But Wamuyu, I'll come back to you first of all, and just to take the question which asks, how can women in Africa respond to injustice, putting in mind traditions which hinder freedom of expression for some women?
My response would be that we need to educate our girls from the very beginning. Because, okay, for the women already in that situation, that's where I was talking about the advocacy for those, the voiceless. We do that because we have the voice. We can do that by for example, even if it means to demonstrate because the Constitution allows, for example, in most countries for people to demonstrate when something happens to women. But I believe is to change cultures that are abusive to women, or cultures that discriminate against women, cultures that are violent to women. Now, what I tried to do when I was a principal in a school is to teach the girls that they don't have to accept abuse because the culture allows it. So I think education for me is key to change a culture. And also remember, culture touches on 5 senses, and that's why it's very difficult to change the culture. It touches on the 5 senses, the eyes, the ears. So to change that, it will take a lifetime. So the best thing is start educating children so that they know it's unacceptable. For example, in our schools now, children are taught about abuse. They are taught through songs, through rhymes, to know that, for example, a man cannot touch you here or there or there. That's an abuse, even if it's their father. So I think for me, education is key. And for those others who are already caught up in this culture for many years, then we are the voice for those. So we speak for them and assist them to speak for themselves. And that's why I'm saying, help them, give them the knowledge to be able to know this is violence. And I've done that a few times with women where they are not seeing that they're in a violent marriage. So I have to speak to them and tell them, you don't accept this, this is abuse. So I think for children, let's educate them. For the older people, let's assist them so that they have a voice to say no to cultures that are violent.
Anything you'd like to add, Marion, on the importance of education within this discussion?
I think just simply that we have to be very careful about social media, that there is in our schools and amongst young people at the moment, there is a very difficult situation. Young boys are being swayed in the way that they think in terms of women and the disrespect that they're being encouraged to have for women and girls. And so I think that in schools and in the home, but perhaps particularly in the home, we have to monitor that, but we also have to do all the things that Wamuyu has just said and educate about how women really should be treated it's a difficult one.
And I think, Marion, one of the ideas when you were speaking earlier that struck a chord was the notion of weaving a new world. I think that struck a chord earlier.
Yes, I think we've got to make a different world, and it starts now, and it starts with not just women and girls, it starts with all of us. We're all brothers and sisters, and I think that that's essential, that we do that weaving together, that we bring together the stitches that will make a new world with new attitudes and gentler attitudes. We can't expect peace and peace of mind if we don't have that gentleness that comes from discussion and from negotiation and from just talking with each other. It works with interreligious dialogue. It's got to work with intergender dialogue as well, I think.
And Wamuyu, so often when we come together on these occasions, the question that everyone leaves with is, what next? If you were to offer your own advice, your own thoughts, where do we go from here?
I think we keep talking and keep creating forums for these discussions. And when Marian was talking there, we can't do this without the male counterparts, because what affects women, affects men and the other way around. So we need to keep this dialogue moving and also doing some concrete efforts. So it's not just talking, but taking steps, like the steps we have talked about now. We kind of just shared ideas. Now these ideas have to change into practical actions. So even if it means, for example, I know in Pax Christi, we write statements, we challenge on the ground. So action, so less talking and more action. And we cannot, for instance, we have to know that we cannot continue, for the male, you cannot continue walking alone when the half of the population or 3/4 are not moving with the male. And the same thing, the women themselves cannot walk alone. So it's the whole balance of working together, because we are all created by one creator. So we need to work together. However, I know here in Kenya, because the women are more being empowered, and there is what we call affirmative action in education. The men are saying, oh, now we are being left behind. There has to be something about the men. We still have to continue empowering women, because the journeys are not the same. So I would say that let's do more work as opposed to more talking. And I would say mainly in policies, changing your policies and the legal frameworks, because it is those policies. We see the violence, but if the policies are not addressed, if, for example, like the UN has so many documents, for example, the 1325 about violence against women, but it's not acted upon. So it remains just, it collects dust, somewhere. So we want those documents actualized, by those bodies. And the church itself also set the example. The church, like if we are talking of equality, let's see it in the church, let's see it in the different institutions. Yeah, so for me, practical is the time to do things.
And I suppose to kind of begin to move towards the end of our conversation, there have been a couple of thoughts in the chat around whether we are moving forwards or whether we are stagnating or even regressing in terms of progress or in gender equality in particular. do you feel as if when you consider examples such as Afghanistan, is it accurate to say that the world generally is moving forward? Is that not representative globally? Is the situation getting worse, or is it getting better? What do you think, Wamuyu?
I would say new realities are emerging. So it's not so much about getting worse or getting better, but it's looking at the emerging issues and seeing how do we address them. For example, when COVID came, of course, violence increased because the men were more at home, than a lot of, because of the men being at home, and some are not used to be at home. Like in Kenya, a lot of violence, gender violence became high. So I think as realities come, we need to address those realities. So they may look as if things are getting worse, but it's just that the world is changing and new realities are emerging. Like when Marian was talking, she was talking about the digital world. Now we even have the metaverse. So when that happens, we need to educate ourselves so that we are moving. Otherwise, if we continue in our traditional ways without moving, then we may think that the problems are getting worse. However, if we move with the society as it's moving and address the new emerging needs using the tools that fit. For instance, the children we have now are not the ones of in the past. So we need to understand the current problems they have so that we assist them. The violence now, look at gender violence. The gender violence that we were experiencing before, now it's also online. So there is no, you are not able to see who is performing the violence because it's online. So we need to address that, to look for the tools to address those type of emerging issues. So I would say is that there is a shift. There is a paradigm. We need to also have a paradigm shift ourselves. So I would not say that problems are getting worse, but I think it's changing. I would rather use the word it's changing, an emerging world, and we need to look for tools to address it. I think currently we are using sometimes old tools to address new realities. Yeah.
That's an interesting consideration, and thank you very much. I'm struck by that notion of not necessarily regression, but change, and a lot there to think about. Thank you very much, Wamuyu, for your time. Thank you, Marian, for coming into the conversation as well, and for your thoughts earlier. I know that you'll say some more just now, but I know that you'll also not thank yourself. So thank you very much for stepping in and sharing with us a bit about Helen as well. We all are incredibly grateful to you for stepping in, but also for giving us a bit of a glimpse into Helen's life and work. So Marian, it's back over to you.
Thank you, Callum, and thank you, Wamuyu. I think just one thing I would add is that we are using the new tool of social media, in that countries like Afghanistan and Iran know what's going on outside of their countries and are using their phones, the social media, to hit back at the systems that are going on. We've learned such a lot today from Wamuyu, and I hope that talking about Helen did her proud. I'm sorry that she wasn't able to be with us. I'm going to hand back now with great thanks to all of you for being here and for asking such wonderful questions, as well as to Wamuyu for being put on the spot and answering them all. I'm going to hand back to Father Jim to close our event with a short prayer. And thank you so much, Father Jim, for being with us as well.
Thank you. It's a fantastic evening, and the speakers were excellent. I'm really privileged and proud to be here. Let's just bow our heads for a moment and place ourselves before the God who loves us. Loving God, as you spoke to us through the voice of our Mother Mary, advocating peace and justice in the dusty streets of Nazareth. As you spoke to us through the witness given by Marion of Helen and Kathy in the mouldy houses of Glasgow. And as you spoke to us through Wamuyu from Nairobi, speaking of the reality of our sisters in Africa, you remind us that peace demands that we listen. That we listen in order to hear the voices, especially of those who are marginalised, of those who at times have no voice. Loving God, it's in listening that we learn, in hearing that we hope, in speaking that we share, and in speaking as one that we stand. So God of peace, open our eyes, open our ears, open our hearts, open our hands, to always, wherever and whenever, sow your seeds of peace. Amen.
Amen, and thank you. And thank everybody for being with us on this very special United Nations International Women's Day. It's been quite special. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
And thank you, Marian.
Gosh, thank you.